Shall we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky all up in your podcast. It's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. Thanks so much for pressing play. This episode, we have returning guests. I always feel honestly privileged when this guest is on. It's Tom Scioli. I think this is his third time on. I know we were on, we talked about Transformers versus G.I. Joe a few years back. We talked about Jack Kirby one time. And today we're going to be talking about a few things, but you have a biography. It's already out now. It's a graphic novel biography of Stan Lee called I Am Stan, which I have a lot of respect for because it's a real biography. It's not like you will get the real Stan Lee, as a human being in this biography. I'm immensely impressed with this biography, Tom. So, and then, we'll talk about it more, before here in a few minutes, because there's some other stuff I want to talk to you about. But how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Shane. And yeah, it's good to talk to you again. It's always a treat.
Yeah. I love your Patreon. I want to pump that now before I forget to, there's for the past couple of years, I've been following your Patreon, and you'll throw a lot of some stuff you put on there is really polished. Some stuff it's almost like, hey, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. You get to see various levels of polish on what you're throwing out there, from rough sketches finished. So I feel like I get a little bit of an insight onto what it's like to be a comic book creator. Your Patreon's almost like you sharing bits of your sketchbook for feedback sometimes, but then sometimes it's this highly polished, here's a full, PDF of a full graphic novel. Enjoy. So it's really cool. How long have you been doing that now? How long have you been doing your Patreon?
Probably since, I guess 2020 is when I started it, for obvious reasons. There wasn't a lot going on in the comics industry and stuff at that point with like lockdown and everything. So it was kind of like, okay, here's a way for me to, stay on track and get things out there.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a video I'll mention here in a minute that you recently put out. And I think, you mentioned in there that like when the pandemic kind of slowed things down, you kind of used Patreon as a creative outlet. So, I always hope when I do a show like this that there are people that are either new to an industry or maybe even they're doing comics as a job or a hobby or whatever, however they're approaching it. So I always hope maybe they can get some tips from the people who have been in the trenches longer. Would you recommend Patreon for a creator? Like, I'm on it, but I don't use it as a main, I just kind of throw it out. I don't use it as a primary leg of my stuff, but
yeah, it's it's up to the individual, but yeah, I get a lot out of it, and it is like just, you can use it, however you want and to whatever degree you want. For me, it's like, I use it. It's basically like, it's like you're like one of my friends or family members, or because that's what it's like. I'm just working on it's whatever's on my drawing board at the moment, and I'll like send stuff to people and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And oh, here's this thing I'm working on and stuff, and they can respond or not respond or whatever. But it's kind of like you're in the loop with just like the stuff as I'm doing it.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, obviously, if people want to send you money each month as a creator, you're not going to be sad about that. But I would imagine that just getting that instant, let me see what people react to and connect with, maybe kind of gives you a little bit of a nudge on what to put more energy into. I'm not sure, like if you're, what people are reacting to, because, you can definitely see different levels of engagement with what you put on there. So,
yeah, that's true. And it is, there are certain things where, it is like, I mean, because I largely just go where, my imagination leads me and stuff, but there are certain things where it's like, oh, okay, this seems to be touching, this seems to be getting a connection, making a connection, getting a reaction. Maybe this is one to sort of like move to the top of the pile.
Right. And we'll talk during this episode about this, but you have a Kickstarter that's about to end, unfortunately, just due to the timing, because we had talked a while back about talking about I Am Stan. So I was like, hey, let's talk about I Am Stan. And then the Kickstarter came along. So just the timing is weird. So by the time this episode goes out, the Kickstarter will probably be open. But you have a project called Witchman, which, people on your Patreon got to see a lot of the early, hey, I'm playing with this Witchman character, and then you kind of kept putting more time into it. Well, let's just go ahead and talk about it now. Let's talk about Witchman now, since it came up. That way, I don't forget to come back to it. And folks, we will be talking about I Am Stan and Stan Lee. It's a very important topic to comics. Stan Lee, mainstream comics as we know them in America are heavy. I mean, part of his biography is a history of the early Marvel comics and these characters coming out. You can't separate them. So, and then of course now they're, multi-billion-dollar, marketing and movies and all that, these characters in pop culture. So we will be talking about Stan Lee, but when it comes to Witchman, the way I would describe Witchman, and this isn't a perfect description, but if in a city that was either Gotham City or like Gotham City, that had that feel of like the 30s and the 40s, even though I don't know if it's set in that time frame. I don't know if you're putting it into a specific time frame or if you're leaving it kind of timeless. If Bruce Wayne had been sitting in his study and brooding, how do I scare the criminal element? And instead of a bat flying through the window, a witch's broom flew through the window. So now you have Witchman running around the skyline at night, striking fear into the evildoers. And that's not a perfect analogy. It's not, delete Batman and drop Witchman in. Okay, there's more to it than that. So why don't you describe how you see Witchman?
Yeah, that's maybe not a perfect description, but it's going on the back of the book. There's going to be a quote from you. It is. It's basically like I wanted to do a golden age, like a golden age comic, and like now, and with the idea of like now's the golden age, that it doesn't have to be the 1930s or the 1940s,
right,
for you to make golden age comics. And so I wanted some.
Yeah,
I wanted something, of that era, something that feels very immediate and has just like a strong, like visual punch and a simplicity. If it's very rare that somebody makes a serious attempt at creating a new superhero nowadays. If you notice, it's either like something heavily product researched or whatever that like the the big two come out with, or some, and where it's some derivative of an existing character. It's very rare that somebody creates like a new superhero, just like a straight up superhero. And when somebody does create a new superhero, they're usually like overly complicated, which again, like that's kind of, if you want to make something that hasn't been done before, that's kind of like the way you do it. Is it's kind of like, well, make something like more complicated than what came before. So I've just been racking my brain for a while, trying to come up with just like a simple, simple concept, visually simple, conceptually simple, that has impact, that isn't like, oh, I've seen this before. So like, and I've done some comics like that, like on my Patreon and stuff, but like Witchman was like kind of the strongest one of that type, where it's just like, the name, you just get it, the pointy hat and the green mask and stuff,
And that's something I think we've lost a little bit when it comes to and I'm talking specifically superhero comics. I'm talking about mainstream 4-color Biff Bam Pow superhero comics, which I love. I think that they're legitimate. I don't know if art form is too high. I've loved them for their own sake, the majority of my life. But I like it when I can look at a character and I immediately get the concept based on the design of the costume and the colors and the symbolism and all that. Like we got away from that big time in the 90s. Like there's all these, I was like, I have no idea. Like if you didn't tell me this guy's name and what he was I would have no idea what he was about. Right.
That was like the beginning of like the convoluted like convoluted character designs, convoluted
Right.
origins, and again, nothing wrong with that. It's just like that's what I wasn't that wasn't what I was going for.
Yeah, and I'm fine. I like I like it when like if I look at Spider-Man, that's Spider-Man. If I look at Batman, that's Batman. If I look at, the Hulk, I mean, you get it immediately what these characters are about. So, and I prefer that design. Like I said, the designs in the 90s is extreme, crazy characters. And they're cool, but they look more like sci-fi characters to me, like in a sci-fi series than like in a superhero series. But let's get off that tangent. We're not here. I mean, there's people that love that stuff, and more power to them. And people have done interesting things with those characters. I'm just talking about the visual aesthetic and the visual design, and just getting right immediately. You get the character, by the design and all that, which you do with Witchman. There's no, right off the bat. In fact, I think, and again, the Batman Witchman comparison is not as strong as I made it coming out the gate. Okay. Like I said, you're not copying Batman. But it kind of almost feels like reading Detective Comics from the 30s or the 40s, right? A character that would have appeared in that. To me, Witchman would be more frightening to run into in an alley than Batman.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm more scared of somebody in a witch costume than somebody in a bat costume.
Right. That big grinning, whatever, all that stuff. And he's got a great origin. You've got the origin story with the tragedy and the pathos, but also the path to power and all this stuff. So Witchman is cool. I supported the Kickstarter. I know you funded, so congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah. So, and it funded fairly quickly. I think you funded a weekend instead of.
Yeah, it took 1 week.
Yeah. So it wasn't this nail biting the last day.
Yeah,
like, am I going to fund or anything?
It was a nail biter like the first couple of days, where it's like, okay, it's off to a good start, but is it just going to like stop? And then, but yeah, funded in a week. It was great.
You had a pretty reasonable funding goal. Hopefully, and one of the reasons we're talking about Witchman is hoping that, you do something with Witchman after the Kickstarter, so that people will see Witchman out there and maybe be able to get a copy. Or like I think we were talking before the show started, that a lot of these crowdfunding sites will let you enter into an on-demand phase after the main campaign's ended. So it sounded like maybe you had some plans for that. And I've seen some people move. I'm not saying that this is what you're going to do. I'm just saying, as long as we're talking about crowdfunding, I've seen some people kickstart on Kickstarter and then they move the on demand over to like Indiegogo or something. And, so I don't know.
There's a lot of options, and I am open to like whatever, however I can get this book out there. And I'm upfront with that too. That's on the thing too. The other thing is, okay, so, when this is over and like, all the backers get their, copies of Witchman or, whatever they ordered, when they get those and things. And if, in the future I do another Kickstarter, whatever leftover copies of Witchman that I have, there's, a go-to tier where it's like, right. Oh yeah, get the new book plus you can get like Witchman, so I don't think, anything's going to like go to waste with this, but again, if the thing ends up, breaking even, or even if I end up in the hole or whatever, I think my math is sound. I don't think that's going to happen, but if so, it's like, I just kind of wanted to get a comic book,
to get it out there.
Yeah. I want to get a comic book out there because it is, like, I love working on stuff like, the Epic Life of the King of Comics, or I Am Stan or something. I love working on those things, but it's been a while since I just did just like a comic book, and that's what I got into this for.
Right, to do comic books, right? So even though you're doing some good work, and I would even say it's important work, right? Because this stuff has gone beyond just pop culture. I mean, it's not the amount of love and respect an impact that like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby have had on, pop culture, which is in turn, affected other things. And people will be researching these people for a long time, and so I think that, this is good and important work. But you said something in a recent video that you put out there. You said there's almost something magical about the comic format, like the monthly comic. And I totally agree with you. It's almost hard to nail down why that's getting that monthly 22 pages or whatever it is more magical or in some ways more effective than a big fat graphic novel. I can't even put into words why, but there is something about it, that episodic, I don't know, cliffhanger, whatever it is. There's something about building that body of work off of, monthly or bi-monthly slices that it is magical. And I don't, I can't objectively say why that is. But I much prefer, if I had a graphic novel that collected 8 issues of something, or if I had the 8 individual issues, I probably want to read the individual 8 issues. I don't know what it is. So, anyway, so do you have any thoughts on why that is? I don't. I
Yeah,
can't tell
I
you.
mean, I have a bunch of thoughts, but
Yeah.
I mean, like when I sort of came into this industry, the era of the graphic novel was like very young. Like it was kind, like so most of these things, like as I encountered them, were as comic books where you have this very like this little slice of story. And it doesn't have to be slight either. Like old comics, depending what era, sometimes in the 70s, a Marvel comic was like 17 pages of story and then all this ad. But like
Right.
just that format, like you can get like a full, you know, uh, you know, 30 some pages of story,
Right.
and like get a nice slice. But for me, it was like I kind of saw this with like Jack Kirby's Fourth World, because Jack Kirby's Fourth World, I could only get it where I could get it because I'm getting like back issues of it in back issue bins, and so it's like, oh, here's issue 6, and it's like, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder what happened before this. I wonder what's going to happen next. And so it's this huge world in your imagination, and then you don't get to read issue 7 immediately after that. It might be a couple of months or a year or something before you read.
Back in the 80s or the 90s, you would gasp when you found that issue 7 in the back issue.
Yeah, exactly.
There it is, finally.
Yeah, and that's how it was. And I think I read it like more or less like completely out of order. And so the whole thing just seemed vast because I wasn't 100% sure what the final issue was either. So maybe there's 30 issues, maybe there's 100 issues, And
I
then,
always thought it was bigger than it was until I sat down and read it.
Right. When they started releasing them as like, trades, then you sit down and you read it from 1 to 11, and it just gets so much smaller. It gets so much smaller. And some people never got that opportunity to read these things in that way, where there's all this anticipation and imagination and things on the part of the reader. They got to be able to, sort of be completists, or even like, read them online for free or something. Just read the entirety of Marvel Comics output from the 60s to now or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's nice to be able to have access to that.
Oh yeah,
we've also lost something. I don't know. I mean, it's always a trade-off. It's always a mixed bag. Like we can have anything we want at our fingertips now, but there was something just, I don't know, that it really cool about stumbling across that issue that you hadn't read. And I think actually one of the first, now I'd seen references to Dark Side and the new, they were showing up in comic books and DC mainstream comics in the 70s and 80s. And of course, I mean, Dark Side even started showing up on Super Friends, in the 80s. But I think the first actual Fourth World thing I read was the Hunger Dogs, where I bought the graphic novel at like Walden Books or something. I don't know. And because I've always been like, I'll read anything. Like I love all comics, indie, Marvel, DC. Oh, this is some book. Oh, this is that Dark Side guy. He's a cool villain. Let me buy the Hunger Dogs. And so I'm like you, and with as many references to the new gods as there were littered throughout DC continuity and stuff. I just assumed it was this vast thing that,
Yeah,
had gone on
like
for
everything
years.
in
Yeah.
comics. Like when
Yeah.
you're reading comics, most comics do run for like hundreds of issues, at least the ones you've
Right.
heard of. So when you encounter a new comic you really like, it's like, oh wow, there's probably 100 issues. You
Yeah.
get Shade the Changing Man or whatever. It's like,
Right.
oh, this is going to be great, and it's like, okay, there's only like 8 issues.
Well, now the thing is, and I'm not here to ding the industry. I don't know what financial realities that the publishers are having to deal with, but they're doing a lot of limited series now that they don't like. They know when they start publishing it, this is going to be 8 issues, 6, but they don't say it. Like it doesn't say on the cover anymore, limited series. So that's always kind of a bummer when I'm just getting into something and then it's like, hey, it's the finale. And I'm like, really? And then I get online and look, it's like, oh yeah, that was planned from the beginning. So, so I'm seeing a lot more of stuff being mini series, than like, well, let's just keep publishing it until it runs out of steam. There has to be something in the economics. And I've spent a lot of time people talking to people about this, the realities of distribution versus the cost versus this or that. Man, they would have these comics that were like Bob's generic superhero comic, and it would run for 100 issues back in the 70s or 80s. And now for some reason we can't do that. So I don't understand all the fiscal realities of whatever, but used to, they could just keep putting them out and putting them out and putting them out. So the financial realities must be quite different these days is all I know. I'm trying to think like, you run across stuff that seems like really mediocre now or really medium or C-list, and they would get, 80 issues, back in the day. So I don't know. It's
Yeah,
it's very odd to me.
yeah. I mean, sometimes things fly under the radar because like the one thing I would always think of was like, because like with Kirby's Fourth World, like with New Gods, they cancel it after 11 issues, and same thing with the Forever People. And then there'd be other stuff coming out from DC around the same time that would like just run and run and
Like
run.
GI Combat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Just a
stuff like
thousand
that.
issues. Right. Yeah.
The one I would always think of is the Warlord. And again, I'm not saying that like Warlord isn't as good as Jack Kirby's work. Like it's different, but it's like kind of weird. It's like, okay, here's a weird, fantasy kind of comic, and this one runs for 100 issues. And like, I don't like, was it maybe just like a way better seller or whatever? But I would think it's probably, some things fly under the radar and some things don't. So something like the Warlord is probably flying under the radar. It was kind of, this very particular kind of like
Right.
personal, like kind of like a niche thing. And I'm sure the guy's name slips my mind. The guy who created Mike Grell. I'm sure Mike Grell probably didn't have as high a page rate as Jack Kirby and wasn't as much of like, hey, we got Jack Kirby from Marvel Comics. And he's doing it. So I feel like maybe the benchmarks were different. So it's like, we're spending a lot of money on Jack Kirby and his book's performing at this level.
And we're not spending as much on Mike Grell.
Yeah. But I don't. So it's just interesting to me that some stuff just kind of,
Well, I would, and I could do a whole podcast on this. One of my drums that I beat is I personally would prefer to go back to cheaper production values, wider distribution, and then collect them in better quality for those people. I just feel like if we got the prices down and the distribution back up, like you go into 7-Eleven or whatever, and you got the little spinner rack, I don't know if I feel like the comics industry would be healthier, but I'm not there. I don't know. I'm not the one making the decisions. So, but I do like that. I mean, if you buy a comic these days, that thing's going to last. It's not on newsprint. It's not going to, 10 years down the road being all brown. So I'm not down on the production values. I just wish we could find a happy medium.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a lot like sort of the, like the record, like the vinyl record industry where it's like, they've done the numbers. There's just sort of like a certain number of people that are going to buy this stuff. And the people are very passionate about it. So they know that, they need to, charge a certain amount for it because the numbers are just there. And then, you get like, 80 gram vinyl or what, like they try to like beef up, what they can do, but there's just this number you can't get past. But yeah, again, it's like a hit is a hit. So
right.
It's like if somebody
They
just sort
still
of
have
comes up with a
hits.
hit, yeah,
I mean, there's still hits
yeah,
out there. I just the way things are done distribution wise, and I'm not against the direct market. I love going to the comic book store. I love, all
yeah,
the cool, but used to comics found people. Now people kind of have to go to the comic store. Used to like, I was at the grocery store and I ran across, Amazing Spider-Man number 43. And that was my entry into comics, so.
yeah. It's. I mean, it was a moment in time, and this is a moment in time, and things like crowdfunding, like it is like, and I've kind of had some conversations with people about this, but that it's like there's you can say like, oh, there was a certain kind of comic that was made in a certain era, or there was a certain kind of, I don't know, board game or whatever. But with like crowdfunding, you can say like, hey, I'm really passionate about like comic books and old school superhero comic books, or I'm really passionate about board games that have like a pair of dice in them or something, like, but and you can actually make that.
Well, and that is when I said earlier, things are always a mixed bag. Like that is an advantage of the current system, is that people can make stuff that's different, that's unique, that's their passion project, that can reach more of a niche audience. Whereas used to, like for a long time, if you didn't go through the big two, your comic wasn't getting out, and you were working for them. They weren't publishing you; you were working for them. So it's always a mixed bag. There's cool stuff happening now too, you've got a couple of friends, is it Ed Piskor and is it Jim Rugg?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are going to do stuff now that back in the 80s, there's no way, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
so,
it's rarefied air. Like, I mean, I feel like I'm in a privileged position, and to get, I mean, just the sort of thing of having, a book like I Am Stan, and it's like everywhere, and all this kind of stuff, like that could only happen now,
right?
like
Yeah,
like 70s comic, the
right.
1970s comics industry, like that wasn't a thing. It's just like, it's like there's certain other things that are like harder to get,
Right.
to get out there,
Yeah.
so
It's always the best of times and the worst
right.
of times, right?
I really appreciate like what this time that I'm living in,
right.
has to offer. I'm really
Right.
grateful for
No,
that.
for creators like yourself, it's much better than it. People can, I remember back in the 80s and comics were this and that, but people, amazing talents like yourself and others would maybe not have been able to get their stuff out. So, if I want to mention one other project that was a passion project of yours, talking about this kind of thing that would have never happened in the 80s. You recently published, I believe through Image, it was like an old Jack Kirby property that was really cool. It was again, this is a very rough, loose analogy. It was almost like Jack Kirby doing like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers. Why don't you tell us about that real quick?
Or Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah, right.
So yeah, it's Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, The
Right.
Adventures of Adam Star and the Solar Legion, and it was like, and again, like I don't really know of any other project like this, but it was it was an old series that Jack Kirby did early in his career. It was a comic book. It was like a backup strip in Crash Comics, and it was called Solar Legion. And he only did 3 issues, but it was before he partnered up with Joe Simon, and so it's like early solo Kirby, and it's just got so much in common with like the rest of Kirby's career. Like
Right.
it's like the seeds are all there, and it just I was just really impressed with it, and it seemed to me like it's kind of like buried in its time. Like it was so early for Kirby. He was just sort of figuring out the comic book idiom. Like he had been doing comic strips, and this was one of his first comic books. And so the images are kind of stacked on each other in odd way, kind of like crammed in,
Right.
and it's hard to read, and like the color is kind of weird and stuff. But I was just reading it and just looking at the reading the words and looking at the pictures. I thought, if you just kind of take this out of that, like the pictures are so beautiful, and the words are so beautiful, and it's like it just,
Yeah, it was
if I could kind of make this,
beautifully drawn book. I mean, it was cool.
yeah.
It was, if it would have kept going, it might have been, it could have been a bigger thing.
Yeah, he could have turned it into something. I mean, and just know, that's what Jack Kirby does. It's just like, give me some time. I'll turn this into something.
My only complaint about that series was that every time a cool villain would get introduced, they would get like blown away by the end of the issue, like Black Pete or whoever he was.
Black Michael.
Yeah,
to me, the space pirate. To me, that was like a strength of it.
Yeah,
was just how ruthless.
Oh yeah, no, they took these dudes out.
Adam Starr, he didn't mess around. He was playing for keeps, and in a way that like, Captain America wasn't, or whoever, like he was.
No, he was there to end the menace.
Kind of like a Frank Miller.
Well, that's the thing. You're saying like Kirby was kind of figuring out the early way to do comics or whatever versus comic strips. So like Black Michael gets introduced. I'm like, oh, here's the big baddie. Here's the continuing villain, right?
Yeah, here's the Joker.
And then by the end of that issue, he's like, okay, his scourge is ended. What's next? So
I mean, but that's Kirby also just keeps moving, and I mean, the Joker died, I think, at the end of the first, Joker story in Batman. So it's just kind of like, that's business as usual too in comics. You have somebody die, like, fall down a pit or whatever, and it's okay. That's the last we've seen of them.
Well, I love that because that shows you the creators at the time. They had no idea that enduring Nate. They were just like, okay, villain dead. They didn't like. They were just treating it like a character that didn't have plot armor or sales armor, or they knew fans loved it. No, he's a bad guy, or you can get rid of him. So, all right. So, is that going to get collected? Has that been collected? Because
I mean, it again, like talking about how great a comic book is. Like that was it. Like there were 3 issues from Kirby, so I kind of remixed them into this one comic book, and that's it. That's all there is. That's all she wrote. And I was so happy with how that turned out, and like what, that comic was. That was kind of what motivated me to like, I want to do another one of these, like as soon as possible, so like I went like almost immediately. I think it was a month later, I launched the Kickstarter to do Witchman. So I was like, I want to do.
Yeah, it was really quick because I know the Star thing. The Solar, you renamed it from the original strip, didn't you?
Yeah, right. It was Solar Legion, and I turned it into Jack Kirby's Star Warriors.
That was it.
Adam Starr and the Solar Legion.
It was a quick, because usually it takes longer in between projects from you, but that was really quick. So it's interesting that you mentioned that Kirby was going, and I'm going to look at this amazing segue I'm doing to I Am Stan to help keep that in the mix. You said, he's going from comics into the comic, or comic strips into comic books. Stan Lee was trying to get out of comic books. He saw it as a dead end and kept trying to come up with these ideas for comic strips to sell to the syndicates because he felt that was where the fame and the money was. So, and one thing about what I Am Stan that reinforced to me, I'm holding it up here, nobody else will see it, just you, was how disposable these characters and stories were. They were like, let's throw out there and see what sticks. Hey, I need something quick. Okay, I'll blast a script out. The almost casual nature of some of these characters getting out there and then becoming so important to pop culture is fascinating to me. For Kirby and Joe Simon and Stan Lee, and for a lot of these other creators, I'm not saying it was blue collar work. I heard one time a comic creator that's doing pretty well and I have a relationship with, they describe comics as blue collar work. I don't agree with that. It's not white collar work. It's not blue collar work. It's its own thing, right? It requires creativity, a skill set, a dedication, a work ethic. There's all this stuff that comes together. But these, in the bullpens they were in back in the day, it was almost like come in, punch in, produce a certain page count, and then go home. And let's just throw stuff out there and see what sticks. And so it struck me again reading I Am Stan, the almost casual nature that these characters and stories were thrown out there. And then the only one that I get a sense that Stan thought was like, okay, this is lightning in a bottle, was Fantastic Four. That's the one that he seems like, no, this is something, there's something going on here with Fantastic Four. There's nothing else out there. He even says something in your words in here. He says, comics is a wasteland. This is amazing. But so much other stuff, they were just throwing it out there and seeing, I can't even think. I mean, there's so many examples of these characters that seem so huge to us, having grown up with them.
Yeah.
Right. And so many other characters that probably could have been just as good, but either never got published after the work got done, or got published once and faded into obscurity. So there's so much going on in this biography that you did, I Am Stan. It's about Stan Lee, not just comic books, but he is so inextricably enmeshed, embedded in mainstream comics. You can't really separate the two, but it goes a lot into his personal life too. So,
yeah, I mean, he started so young, like,
yeah.
He was.
They're like, who's this kid?
Power.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He was in a position of power at such an early age too, and so his peers, like as the decades went on, his peers, like the other editors at DC and stuff, nobody had the kind of autonomy that he had, because again, he had to report to Martin Goodman, but it's like after that, he's basically in control of the whole comics division. Over at DC, you had a bunch of editors who were sort of, fighting with each other over their little fiefdoms within it. He was, younger than those guys too. So he was, kind of this dynamic figure that got to sort of just be there through all this time. And yeah, when you talk about those old eras of, like the 40s and 50s, where like there genuinely was a bullpen, there was a Marvel bullpen where like everybody comes in and is work, like that idea of a Marvel bullpen, that was always like so like romantic to me.
Mm-hmm,
like
me too.
And I thought that's, when I was a kid and like thought about, making comics and stuff, I thought that's what I would grow up and then go into, like where you show up in a room and you're working on your comic, and then there's, somebody working on Spider-Man over there, and then somebody's over there working on the Hulk, but it didn't even exist in the 60s. Like it didn't even exist when, the Hulk and Spider-Man were being made. Stan
Lee did such a good job in his editorials or whatever in the comics, and also in what he'd go out and talk about how Marvel gets done. I mean, they did it at one time. They actually pressed a record. You probably know about this.
It's in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. The quote. Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. The quote unquote bullpen sitting around talking and everything. And he couldn't get Steve Ditko to be on it and all that. And, so let's talk about Stan Lee and your biography. So you and I know people who have been into comics for a long time know a different Stan Lee than the average person now. Okay. They know him through his cameos in Marvel movies. They know him through convention appearances where he became sort of the favorite uncle or favorite grandpa of pop culture. Right. And that all started, in my opinion, in Mallrats with Kevin Smith, when he had Stan Lee be in the movie and give one of the main characters love advice, right? Making up a story about the Hulk or something like that. I can't remember. I can envision the scene. And I've talked to people because like when I saw that, I was like, that's Stan. I can't believe that's Stan Lee. They got Stan Lee in a movie. This, because that was what, in the 90s. I've been reading this guy's stuff in comic books. I've been reading his comic books and reading his editorials and his comments. Was it Stan's soapbox and all that stuff? But a lot of people, that's where they got introduced to Stan Lee, was in Mallrats. And then he kind of started showing up in, and they had heard Stan Lee with, comics or whatever, but that was where he got into the larger mainstream. And so they see him as this friendly, like you've even got on the cover of I Am Stan, his sunglasses have these little half moon,
Mm-hmm.
like happy eyes, right? With the little, like, which is how most people think of him, right?
Smiling Stan.
Smiling Stan. Um, but he's in it, and I might upset some people here, but Stan Lee was a human being. What most people think of Stan Lee is a persona that he developed. And this is this friendly uncle, right? This friendly, hey, this is great. He was a promoter. Everybody, he'd come in and light up the room and all that stuff. But there was also times where I've always kind of thought of Stan Lee as kind of half genius promoter and half slightly uncomfortable car salesman, right? Like the guy you run into on the, the lot in the used car, who's got charisma, but there's something a little forced about it at times, and a little, maybe he's trying to sell you a car you really don't need, but he needs the money. So, and then there's an even Stan that goes back further than that, because I'm basing that on his persona in like the 70s and the 80s, right? When he was writing the editorials and the soapboxes and talking about the Marvel way of doing comics. And, he started wearing the wig and, all the hip clothes and all that. Mm-hmm. Before that, he was just like a regular balding dude running a comic book editorial division, right? And at times being pretty ruthless with his employees. I mean, he installed closed circuit TV to keep an eye on us way before that was like a normal thing. You have a lot of anecdotes in here. Like he came out with the whip one time, like whipping his, and he got it. And some of this could be attributed to his youth, because if I had a position of power in my youth, I could see myself doing sort of the same thing, where he climbed up on the file cabinet and he was like, "Bow to your king," and all this stuff.
Yeah, that era of Stan didn't last very long, and I think it is like what you're talking about. It was like a product of sort of youth, of having been in the army for right. a few years there, and then now he's finally out, because it didn't go on too long. It was kind of like, this like really enfant terrible phase that he went through, and then was out of, and maybe you see little glimmers of that later, but it's never as like bad or as intense as it was in that like post-war moment.
But then he would do jerky stuff and like I said, this is a human being. We all have good qualities and bad qualities. This I Am Stan, your biography, is not a hit piece. I don't want to present it that way. I believe that what you have done, as you have researched as well as you can the real Stan Lee and presented it, which is what I want. I've had the friendly, happy used car salesman Uncle Stan Lee. I want to know who he really was. I don't want the polished, whatever corporate image of him. I want to know who he really was. And I think you've done a really good job presenting that. Basically the way you've done this graphic novel is it's 190 something, 180, 190.
Yeah, it's like it's 200 something, but the numbering doesn't start until after like the title page. So I think it's like a little over 200.
Okay. So and every page is an anecdote or a glimpse into Stan's life, an episode from Stan's life, or an important moment from Stan's life. And some of the stuff you're going to be surprised. You'll be like, "Oh, wow, I'm surprised that Tom put that in there." But you've got your footnotes, you've got your bibliography, you've got your sources in here. So you're not making any of this stuff up.
That would be I would be a lot more comfortable making a made up, Stan Lee book or a made up Jack Kirby, like, and Howard Chaykin is kind of doing this like history of comics,
I
but it's like a
love that.
fictionalized version. Yeah, it's really great, really fun. And like you have the license to just make things, because that's my real superpower, is invention and just creating stuff. But when you're making something like this, it's a different kind of discipline, and yeah, you got to check and recheck and double check and
No, I think, you're footnoted and you got your bibliography enough here. So if anybody is like, hey, I don't, that's not right. It's like, it's documented. Go look it up.
Some of this stuff you can actually watch the video
Right.
of it, like
Right.
he was a very documented person.
So my point was Stan Lee is he's a human being where most people know his persona, his public persona, which towards the end it got, super squeaky clean with I guess his entourage or his handlers or whatever were controlling I don't know. But once the movies took off and all that money really got involved and he was kind of a public face of that, then, I think that the Stan Lee that people saw or read about was further and further removed from the real Stan Lee. That's my opinion. So, but he had, Stan Lee was like, he was a real dude, and he wasn't a hack. I mean, he came up with some cool stuff. Some of his editorials are really good, in my opinion. He's got editorials on racism, and he's writing in comic books in the, back in the day, like he'd have Stan's soapbox and he'd put an editorial out. And I thought some of that stuff was actually really good.
Yeah, he did such a great job with sort of the persona and reinventing himself that it does overshadow like the genuine talent that's there. I mean, I do believe he was a real, creative talent.
Yeah, no, he was, he, it's history gets muddled over to what he's directly responsible for and what like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko's directly responsible for. I think Ditko created a lot of Spider-Man. Stan was involved, but the amount of credit that Stan takes for Spider-Man, I don't think he deserves, but only, I don't know. I wasn't there. It gets muddled, but there's ample documented evidence that he was very creative. He was a good writer. And he had a good eye for let's run this and see what happens,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, like, for example, he wanted to run Spider-Man with Steve Ditko and Martin Goodman squashed it. So people don't like spiders. And then there's that very famous, if you know Stan Lee's life, there's that famous moment where he's like, comics are done. And his wife said, well, just do what you want to do then. Put yourself into it. And when that happened, now in the movies, that would be the moment where everything magically changed. But
right,
that was a turning point.
It was. There was still a road to go, a long road to go. But it was the two books that I think were like directly, after that sort of turning point were Fantastic Four, but also Amazing Fantasy. And again, Amazing Fantasy eventually, produces Spider-Man. But the issues before that, that's another aspect of, hey, why don't you do comics for grown-ups? Why don't you do comics that are a little more intelligent or sophisticated? So he does this sort of with Steve Ditko, and where every story is Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, where, prior to that, it would be like there'd be a Jack Kirby story, a Steve Ditko story. When it became Amazing Adult Fantasy, it was like a Twilight Zone anthology with one artist, and it's a great read. Like it really, like those were the two things. And then, Fantastic Four worked out. Amazing Fantasy didn't exactly work out, but at least they got Spider-Man out of it.
And just to give an example of one of the moments from that you cover in I Am Stan, basically they were canceling. They had already done Spider-Man, the story that appears in Amazing Fantasy 15. They'd already done that story. Jack Kirby came up with a character that was basically the Fly, but as a spider, because magic ring and I've got spider powers or whatever. And Stan gave it to Ditko and said, let's rework this a little bit. And So you got that story that everybody knows from Amazing, or if they don't know it, they know that incredible cover from Amazing 15 where Spider-Man's, swinging across the cover, I think carrying the guy. And the reason that got published was because Amazing Fantasy was getting canceled. And Stan was like, well, I might as well shove Spider-Man in there and get it published because Martin told me I can't publish it, but it's getting canceled, so who cares? And then, of course, boom, we get Spider-Man. So, that's what I'm talking about, these wonderful moments that are almost accidents or casual, right, from comics history, whereas you and I and so many other people have this vision of this bullpen with golden ink in the pens, and angels coming down and delivering perfect stories that would sell no matter what, and Stan presiding over it like everybody's favorite uncle. So,
yeah, I mean, it is kind of like, okay, if, if Spider-Man is such a, personal project for, Stan Lee, or such a personal project for Steve Ditko, how come, Steve Ditko never made like another Spider-Man? Or how come Stan Lee, in like the 70s and 80s, how come, or 90s or 2000s, where's that genius who came up with Spider-Man? But it is, yeah, they're coming out of just this like environment and this era. And I don't think, I don't know that any of those guys would sit down and say, how am I going to best like express myself and my genius and what's inside of me? Let me make Spider-Man. It's like, no, it's just, that was kind of the vehicle for, it's like, okay, we want, you got some, weird stories you can give us, or you got some, superheroes seem like they're hot.
Right. Exactly. They were like, hey,
come up with,
these long underwear characters seem to be getting popular again. Let's see what we can do, And so people were just bringing in stories and ideas and concepts, and they're like, yeah, let's try to work with this.
And it kind of has to be that way. It's when somebody, and you see this in Stan's life, like when it's like, okay, now I'm going to make my big serious statement, you kind of fall on your face. It's when you're kind of relaxed and just kind of playing around and stuff that you create the great work.
Yeah. And, and like I said, he saw, until the Marvel Age of Comics came along, which is in the 60s, he saw comics as a total dead end. He kept trying to get out of it, right? He was like, the older he got, the more he wanted to get out of it. And in fact, I think he came up where he did come up, you document this, he came up with a successful comic strip that the Syndicate wanted, but then his artist like fell off a train because he wasn't wearing glasses, And,
yeah, Joe Manili. Yeah, that was like just such a tragic story.
Right.
And yeah. And he was like, he was like Stan's right-hand man. And they did a lot of great stuff together. And yeah, it was just such a, just like an out of left field. It's, in this industry that was kind of dying, seemed like it was going out. And then just to have that kind of personal tragedy, of somebody you were working that closely with, it really, I feel like all of those eras of comics probably like there was maybe a period pre-war, during the war, and post-war where it's like just flush with cash. Comics is going so strong, but once Wortham starts coming in, and every year must have seemed like, okay, this is it for comics.
But what's weird? There's something about comics. I don't know if it's because of just where it exists as a medium or an art form or whatever in our culture. I can't remember a time when it didn't always seem like it was on the edge of, it always seems like it's on the edge of going bye-bye, but it doesn't because people love them. Yeah.
When you hear that talk now, or sometimes when I, in moments feel like, oh, maybe it is like happening and stuff, I do think like, oh yeah, well, that's what they thought in the 50s. That's what they thought in the 60s. That's what they thought in the 70s. That's, there's always a path forward.
It's an established medium and art form. So in some way or another, there will be comics. It just who's publishing them, who's getting them out, how are they getting distributed? The internet, of course, has been a huge boon for getting word out and raising, Kickstarters and all, and just publishing. Some people just publish on the internet, and I know you put some of your stuff out there on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfectly valid approach too. It's like when you're talking about like, making comics a mass medium again, it's like, well, yeah, you can actually publish your stuff and make it accessible, worldwide in full color, even maybe with some like animation or something if you so choose.
Well, the jump that it hasn't made yet. Now, I think it has some in Japan and maybe some other areas. There's not many people making comics for online that take advantage of online and get away from the traditional printed page. Like Scott, I know you've read that, Scott reinventing comics, and I'm sure you've seen his Zot, Hearts and Minds, where he created a comic that was specifically to be viewed in a web browser and took advantage of that. We've never made that jump, really, as far as the industry as a whole. I see a few experiments here and there that are kind of interesting, but right now it's still pretty much comics are being created. Even if they're being created for online, they're being created as if they're for the printed page, like a certain, dimensions and, following the language of the printed page comic. I don't know if that's the right thing. So I don't know if we'll ever make that jump over, but I thought Scott McCloud had some really good ideas about, taking stuff online only. There's that, I don't know if you remember, but there's that great scene where in Hearts and Minds, which was the Zot story. It's still up, by the way. You can find it on scottmccloud.com. I think it's scottmccloud.com. Where, he took advantage of the scrolling webpage to kind of do this. They were falling and falling and falling and falling. And you couldn't have done that on the printed page because it would have been too long. So anyway, that's a tangent. I'm going to shoot it in the head and get back to this stuff. So there was another tangent that you mentioned that I want to give a shout out to, because I've been these Howard Chaykin Hey Kids comics. I think he's on book 3 now, Profits and Losses or something like that. And Profits is Prophetts. But that's a very good fictionalized history of the comic book industry. And I guarantee you some of it's not fiction. He just put a code, he put a code of fiction
to protect
on top.
the innocent,
protect the innocent.
Protect the guilty.
And that stuff fascinates me. I don't know why. Like this, the Jack Kirby stuff, your biography, the I Am Stan, the what Howard Chaykin's doing. I don't know if you read Alan Moore's Illusions short story collection, but
I want to. I want to get it's on my to-do list or my to-read list. I want to real bad. Yeah.
You have to read What We Can Know About Thunderman.
Yeah.
And it's Thunderman, which was actually a character I think he pitched a while. I don't know. But anyway, so he adapted it to the story, and it is a fictionalized, basically story of like Marvel and DC. It kind of feels like in the 80s, that kind of big heyday of the 80s. And there's some stuff in there that's pretty grim. Like, wow. So he even, and I have not had any time at all to research to see if this is completely fabricated that he came up with or if it's true. But he basically implies that national periodical publications came about because the original publisher needed a way to run moonshine or illegal whiskey during Prohibition. And so all these trucks driving around delivering periodicals were a perfect cover to move this stuff around. And I've had no time at all to see, is that something he completely pulled out of his butt to make the story more interesting, or if there's any grain of truth in that at all. Have you heard?
I mean, those specific details make it very like good storytelling, like it makes you understand. But like, I mean, my understanding is that there was sort of organized crime connections with the early days of comic books and how the distribution, and that they were distributing all kinds of things. So yeah, that making it specifically like moonshine whiskey and stuff, that is just like a really evocative detail. I don't know if that was a particular thing. Yeah.
Well, he kind of implied again, this is a story. I don't know. And then I'll get off this after I throw this out there. We'll get back to Stan Lee, who I'm not implying Stan Lee was implying
No,
was
right.
connected to organized crime.
Yeah.
He just got a lucky break because his cousin was a publisher, so that was his in to getting in very young. So they kind of imply that at least on DC's side, national whatever his pastiche of that was, that DNA of sort of organized crime in this and that was kind of why so many early comics creators just got screwed, right? Like
it's a criminal enterprise to begin with. So
yeah, like Thunderman, who's a stand-in for Superman, basically, that like when Joe Simon, Schuster and Simon, brought Superman to
Siegel and
DC.
Schuster.
Siegel, my bad.
Yeah.
Thank you. My bad. That I think we were talking about Simon earlier.
Joe
so
Simon.
I got stuck in my head. Yeah, Joe Simon. And that they just got taken to the cleaners, So, but anyway, it's all conjecture. It's just interesting, Back to Stan Lee, I don't think was ever shady like that, although he was a shrewd businessman. So I think maybe some people feel like maybe they got screwed over, but I don't think he was outright trying to do illegal stuff or anything like that to line his pockets.
Well, those origins of like the comics industry are sort of like higher up, kind of things. And I guess the closest Stan ever got to like getting into any trouble was like during the .com era, where there were possibly some, shady things going on that Stan may or may not have had knowledge of or participated in. But yeah, that's sort of the alpha and omega of like the the shady dealings of like the early early periodicals.
Well, he would so I guess with Stan, he wouldn't steal something from you, but there's an anecdote that and I was like, man, I'd be real pissed off if that happened to me, where one of the artists came in and said, hey, you said I could have my art back. And Stan Lee was like, oh, yeah, sure. So he pulls out the art and he draws a huge black X over it and hands it back.
I mean, it was, and that was also of that like really bad era of Stan that he kind of like grew out of. But that wasn't uncommon in published. That was at both. And Wally Wood would talk about that too with like DC. He said that sometimes he feels like, editors and stuff would make corrections in like really, greasy, unerasable, pens or crayons or markers or whatever, just so that, he wouldn't be able to sell this, piece of original artwork and stuff. So yeah, that was. I mean, it's such a weird, just and Stan was like one of the better editors. That's the I think Barry Windsor Smith talked about this. Like a lot of guys would talk about this, where it's like whenever they'd sort of been fed up with Stan, they'd go over to DC and just get scared. But it's like, okay, yeah, Stan's not like these guys. Like we didn't realize how good we had it with Stan. It was just kind of, comics was just that.
If you read, I keep up with Paul Kupperberg.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I keep up with his Twitter and his blog, and I've also got he puts these books out, direct conversations, which are interviews with comics creators.
Yeah.
And he gets it's kind of sad because the comics industry editorially was pretty ruthless on the creators. And there's some pretty bad stories out there. I hate to hear that, because I just want to think of it as this, as the fun and the joy that I had reading the comics, but there's always a business and human nature behind it, so there's always drama going on or whatever. So, and I guess that's another, would you say that going the route you've gone now where you're more independent, would you say you've been spared a lot of that? Or, because I know that you've said that when you went to IDW and did Transformers stuff, you had hardly any editorial interference at all. but otherwise, when you've gone, like when you call up Image and say, "Hey, I want to do Jack Kirby's Star Warriors," or or let's do this or that, what do you feel you've been spared a lot of that because you're not a direct employee or something?
Yeah, I mean, that was a different era and stuff, and you just have like more options now and stuff, and um, like, yeah, I just didn't have to spend a lot of time in an office, and we're also in an era where you can send things, so like you don't get caught up in office politics and things like that. I mean, the only like, yeah, I've been pretty much spared. The only time where I got a taste of like, oh, this is the comics everybody's talking about is when I did some stuff at DC. That was where it was like, where it's like, oh yeah, like because it was my first time working with DC, and I kind of had an idea of what DC was like just from hearing about it and stuff. But I'm like, nah, because everybody I was talking to there and stuff was super nice and everything was great. But then it's like when I was working there, it's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, somebody in the office doesn't like something in this, last issue, so you're fired. And I wasn't
Which
like,
is, yeah, that boggles my mind
yeah,
because you were working for the Young Animal imprint. I want to give a little context to this, and this also gives me a chance to promote you just put out a video a couple of days ago. I'll link it in the show notes at shaneplays.com. People can also go to YouTube and search for the Total Recall Show, which is a thing that you do with a buddy of yours where it's more of a pop culture.
right. Yeah, comics are part of it, but it's others like movies and stuff. So
this is called the video is called A Comic Book Creator's Journey from Oedipus, which is one of your earlier Kirby inspired works, which is great. I recommend people go check it out, to Witchman with Tom Scioli. And you this is an amazing video because you're very open and honest, and you kind of walk people through your journey and thought process with your comics career from the beginning to now. But one of the things you mentioned is, so you were doing Superpowers as a backup feature. I think it came out in Cave Carson has a Cybertronic eye, if I remember right. And I bought that comic just because I wanted your backup feature. Although I will say the Cave Carson series was good.
Oh yeah, I thought the whole line was excellent.
No, the Young Animals doing cool stuff. I liked. Was it Gerard Way? Who was it that was writing?
Gerard Way. It was his imprint within DC.
Yeah. So it was supposed to be like kind of independent spirit within DC. So it's an imprint. There was some stuff I liked in there. I liked the Cave Carson stuff. I know they were doing some crazy stuff with the Doom Patrol.
Yeah, that was the flagship book. Yeah, Doom Patrol.
I actually liked Mother Panic quite a bit. I thought Mother Panic was cool. But so you did a backup feature, which I miss backup features, and DC's actually starting to bring those back. Some of the books have backup features now. I think that's a great way to get characters out there in stories you otherwise wouldn't get, right? That couldn't justify their own issue. But you were doing Superpowers, which was supposed to kind of use the Superpowers toy line or comic book from way back, but they fiddled with it and all that. But I really think, and I'm not saying this to rub salt in the wood, because I know that's got to bother you what happened, but I thought that was going to be your next Transformers versus G.I. Joe. I really did.
Well, that's what I thought too. I thought, and I was bringing that kind of energy into it of like, and that what like I put as much work into that as I did into Transformers versus G.I. Joe. Just only 18 pages of it ever saw print, but I have, I have notebooks and notebooks filled with all, like I created like a whole world for it, and it was and I entered into it with the same energy as Transformers versus G.I. Joe. It was just with a completely different outcome. Now Transformers versus G.I. Joe could have gone that way too, because I approached it the same way, where it's like, I'm just going to make the best comic I'm capable of.
Yeah, you could have done something that bothered Hasbro.
Yeah,
but it sounds like they were pretty hands off, and they just trusted IDW.
Yeah, so I thought there'd be like even more freedom at sort of like, okay, no longer doing like a licensed comic, but doing
right. It's
like,
their
I thought there'd be more,
right.
But it was like incredibly restrictive and just seemed very consistent with this like DC that I knew from like studying like the DC of like the 60s and 70s. It's like, oh, okay, like somehow like sometimes office culture persists even though the people who were there at this point are no longer there at this point, but somehow the culture is
Right.
still, so it was just so restricted. It kind of blew my mind. Like I didn't think.
Yeah, I hate that happened to you. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Like,
not a big. I mean, it's
yeah.
just like, again, the same thing could have happened at any time. It just didn't. Like, that was just where it happened. Because I go in there with that understanding where it's like, I'm gonna go for broke, and if I get fired, I get fired. But I'm gonna like put everything I can into it and push the envelope. And yes, sometimes that blows up in your face, and so it blew up in my
It did.
face.
Yeah,
You know.
I could see it if you were like a backup feature in like Action Comics, but you were a backup feature.
Right. That's what I thought. I had a little more leeway because it was like that nobody was gonna take it that
So they
seriously.
want the independent
Right.
energy, but they don't really want
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
be
They want
wild
to
and
say
crazy,
that
but
they
not
have it.
too wild and crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well,
yeah.
I'm still sorry that happened. So, and this can be totally out. This doesn't have to make it into the episode. I can delete it out, whatever. Do you feel comfortable discussing the moment that bothered them so
Well,
much?
they never
If you
told
don't,
they never told me, so I only had
oh,
to like
really?
guess at what it was.
Wow. They didn't see what that's
No,
uncool. I mean, they won't even.
that was kind of the weird thing was that I'd turn in, an issue or whatever, and be like, "This is awesome, great, and then I turn in the next one. Wow, this is great, this is awesome, and then it's like, it was time for like the next arc or whatever, and it's like, okay, what do you want to do for the next arc? And then I said, here's the next arc, and then it's like, you're fired. So like, it wasn't like, it was
I don't get it.
kind of
That
shocking.
sucks.
Again, it's no, it's.
So you don't even know what the trigger moment was?
No,
The trigger thing?
I mean, I have some guesses and things, but yeah, I don't, because it wasn't like, oh, and again, even with like at any point, like I'm completely amenable to like redraw, rewrite, like
Right. You didn't even, they didn't get a chance to revise.
yeah,
They just said you're out
like
of
I'm
there.
happy to make any change you want me. And it was the
Wow.
same like when I said like, oh, what I want to do for the next 6 issues.
Yeah.
It's like, if you didn't like that, I'd be happy to. But it was just like, now
Right.
you're
Wow.
you're done
That's
at
crazy.
DC.
I'm so sorry that happened. Regimes change though.
Right,
If I
yeah.
understand correct, the person who objected or asked you to or fired you is no longer there. But you never know, man. 5 years from now, somebody could get into an editorial position of power and be like, you know what? I want to revisit. Just like when Eric Larson got into a position of influence at Image, and then that opened up the door, for him. He was like, yeah, let's look at some of your stuff. Because he was a fan of, I forget what it was. Y'all were both fans of something, and that you talk about it in your video where Eric Larson became the publisher.
I mean, we're just fans of Jack Kirby in general.
That was it. So Godland, that led to Godland.
It led to
That's
Godland,
right. Yeah. So, and that's another thing I want to touch on this. People go watch this video. It's about an hour long. And if you have any interest at all in either being a comics creator or wanting to know what it's like behind the scenes, go watch this video. It's in the show notes, or go to at shaneplays.com, or go to Total Recall show on YouTube and look for a comic book creator's journey from Oedipus to Witchman with Tom Scioli. But you talked about how Godland, like, I don't understand the economics of the comics industry. And I don't want to know how much money you make or don't make. That's not my business. But I am trying to get to, if there's somebody that wants to get into comics, they would probably look at, because how many issues did you do of Godland?
It ran 38 issues.
So 38 issues, to me, that sounds somewhat successful, especially these days. But from what I understand, you never made a whole lot of money out of it.
Yeah, right, exactly. It was just kind of, after a certain point, we were doing it basically for free. It was but again, it's like, but yeah, talk to anybody in comics, and it's like, especially that period or whatever, like, it's rough out there. It's really, it's rough out there.
You got to love it.
Yeah.
Right? You got to love it.
Yeah. And I did, eventually get to a point where I was a, working cartoonist making my living, entirely from comics and stuff. But, it's, you can spend a lot of years in the mines, before that moment happens,
Right. Yeah. No, I love how I'll just spoil one more moment from the video.
Oh, please. I mean, it's all,
I love that you were so honest that you said you kept chasing the perfect creations you wanted to make, and they were creatively fulfilling, but you weren't moving forward in the industry like you wanted to. Um, and then your friends and or whoever, fellow peers, comic book people, they basically told you that since you had a day job, I'm paraphrasing, your butt wasn't hanging over the fire, and you were, you had that safe day job, I guess, and so you were in, but you weren't all in, kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah, you gotta like
Yeah,
jump off the cliff
right.
and build your wings on the way down. Which again, that is dangerous advice. It's
Oh,
dangerous
sure.
advice.
Yeah,
But it was the right advice for me at the right time.
right.
But I hesitate, like, because after that, I started recommending to other people, like, oh, you got to quit your day job. I quit my day job and everything's been great ever since. You got to do the same thing. But that's
Yeah.
dangerous
It's
advice.
different from
Take that with a
everybody,
grain of
right?
salt.
Especially if you have like a family and kids
But
and
yeah,
stuff like
family,
that.
kids,
So
health insurance is nice,
yeah,
all that kind of
it's
stuff. But
nice.
yeah.
Yeah. But what I loved was because most people, and when we're talking about the gritty realities of comics as an income, as a business, is you were like, I was chasing these perfect projects and I was creatively fulfilled, but it wasn't moving me forward. And then you quit your job. And so you started calling people up and saying, what work for hire do you have for me?
Right. Yeah.
And that's when the doors started opening for you. And I think a lot of people, they think it's different. They think when they tell the work for hire people to take a hike and they only chase their perfect vision, then that's when the movie fanfare starts playing and the montage happens and then they're successful. So I thought it was very honest that you shared that when you started calling up people and saying, okay, what work is there? Can I do that? Is when your career started gaining traction. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and Transformers versus GI Joe happened like as a direct result
Right.
of that, and that was like the turning. That's where I went from
Right.
sort of like part time to full time, and but again, there's a million paths into comics. So another alternate path might have been to just sort of quit my day job and then double down on the creator and stuff, and then Kickstarter was around back then. I could have maybe started so that would have been a possibility too. It's just, I think the mindset of, sort of having like a safety net versus the mindset of like, okay, this is, I live or die based on this. So like on a daily basis of like, okay, how do I get this business going or whatever,
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, a lot of people that I know that are in comics, I know a lot of people that are in comics and I know a lot of people that are in video games and also tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
And for comics and tabletop role-playing games, most people are not full-time, especially in the indie arena. Most people that I know. So if you can make it happen full-time, more power to you. And I'm glad you've been able to. And I love watching, I love watching the stuff you share on whatever. And I like watching, comics kayfabe and all that. And, with Ed Piskor and Jim, is it Rug or Rug? Is it Rug?
Rug, yeah.
Jim Rug. That if you want to be a comics creator, I really think people need to like follow you and they need to go watch like comics kayfabe. It's like the great courses, those free. It's like the great courses in comics industry, and like I've learned so much watching your stuff on Patreon and watching you guys or just Jim and Ed break down art on comics kayfabe. Like it's just there's like a whole nother world there. Even after all these years of reading comics, I never even knew existed on how to read and interpret a layout and art on a page. Like there's so much more there than I ever even knew. And I've read who knows how many comics, man.
Well,
so it's good stuff.
To me, the difference is like, for me, it's like that stuff's like life or death. So it's like,
Right.
if you're a fan and stuff, you're reading it, it's like, oh, I like when this happens. But
Right.
for me, it's like, okay, when somebody does this, this, and this, it works. And when somebody does this, this, and this, it doesn't work. When they do this, this, and this, their comic is a hit. When they do this, this, and this, their comic's a flop. What is that? Where is, so
Right.
It's like laser focus. So
Right.
like I have this body of that's just so much higher stakes. You know, it was hard
Right.
earned that
Well,
like I can now share.
Even check me out, segueing back to I Am Stan, you know, even your choice of every page is a moment, is an anecdote, right? But it reads like a flowing narrative. And that had to be a conscious decision, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, but a lot of people, when you read a comic book, you don't realize, like, you know, I mean, there's a lot, because you probably had to think, okay, how can I best present a person's life in 200 pages,
Mm-hmm.
especially, you know, and because Stan Lee he's one of those people who was a dynamo that was he was never sitting on his butt. He was constantly chasing stuff, trying to make stuff happen. He was kind of larger than life, like met his wife and said, "Oh, I've been dreaming about you my whole life." You know, he proposed to her almost immediately. You know, and I don't know, and got out there, and he knew the promoter part of him, the car salesman part of him, knew when he had a lightning in a bottle. He knew how to promote it. He knew how to, you know, uh, whatever. He's not a carnival barker, but there's a little bit of carnival barker in him. There's a little bit of, how would you describe his promotion style?
Yeah,
I mean, it was amazing.
it's very American. It's you know, P.T. Barnum, you know, is in there,
right?
but he like he's, you know, such an interesting guy, so multifaceted. But I think when he says Fantastic Four, the world's greatest comics magazine, you know, with like the first issue, like I think part of him knows that it's just hype and BS, but then part of him believes it too.
Right. Now you could tell, not only from your biography, but for other stuff I've read about, he really felt that Fantastic Four was something. And compared, now he probably didn't think it was the great American novel, but compared to the other comics that were on the market, he felt that this was a step up. This was something, right? And it did. It kicked off the Marvel Age of Comics. So, you know,
There's
him and
no
Jack
comic
Kirby
like
worked,
it, period.
right?
Before,
Period.
like
Yeah, at
before
all.
that, and there's things you can point to that were close, that were like almost there, but
Right.
nothing, you know. And Challengers of the Unknown being an obvious one, you know, Jack Kirby's
Right.
thing, but Challengers of the Unknown isn't the Fantastic Four, you know.
Right. Yeah, the tone. So when people talk about the Marvel Age of Comics, what we're talking about is not only these amazing comics that Jack Kirby and uh, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and there were other people in the fold too, but you know, they were driving personalities in it. Steve Ditko kind of bowed out fairly early. He got disenchanted with, I guess, mainstream editorial practice. I don't know what it was, but he bowed out. But he kept making comics up till he died. You know, he was still making comics. The guy's still publishing his stuff. But the characters became more real. The physics became more real. Now, by today's standards, it still seems very cartoony and childish. But at the time, it was such a huge contrast from like what you were going to get from DC, or I don't even know if Charlton was publishing at that time or not. You know, the Atlas, these other, like they really had problems. The Thing didn't want to be a hero. You know, Spider-Man had problems out the wazoo. He let his uncle get killed, for goodness sakes, and they had problems. And I think, you know, I think even in your book he talks about how it's like long underwear, monsters, and continuing soap operas. I think is kind of how he said this is working. So, but yeah, you know, and then, you know, by the time I started really reading comics continually in the early and mid '80s, that was the template everybody used. All heroes had problems. You know, it was one tragic this, tragic that. You know, reluctant heroes, all this stuff. But when they did that in was it 63? When
Mm-hmm.
that was a milestone change in an approach to storytelling. And like, you know, you can see that it's a watermark. You can see the before and after.
Yeah, 63 is the Avengers, and then 61 is Fantastic Four.
It's 61.
But it's one of those things that those innovations have been so thoroughly like incorporated into comics that it's easy to forget like how revolutionary they were. And so you read those old comics and you assume, well, if you picked up an issue of Superman, it was probably the same thing around that time. And it's like, no, like you got to read a lot of the stuff before Marvel and the stuff like before DC started copying what they were doing at Marvel to see like, no, it was really bad. They weren't doing anything like this. This was a breakthrough. It's just, you read those comics and it's just so natural. It just seems like, it seems like it had to have been always there because it's just so like, of course, superheroes are worried about stuff. And of course, their stories just continue one after the other. And, but it was not like that.
I want to share one anecdote here from, like, again, Stan Lee is a human being. Okay. He's got high points. He's got low points. If you read this, you're going to see stuff that like, wow, that really doesn't make Stan look great. But you're going to see other stuff like, oh, Stan's trying to be a good guy and take care of people here. And Stan's struggling just like everybody else. He had at one point, he had family basically go into business against him and stuff after he had helped them for decades.
That's a rough moment.
Yeah, super rough moment. But, and you see him, like I said, you're going to see the warts and you're going to see the good stuff. And it's all documented. This isn't a hit piece on Stan Lee, but it's also not a fluff piece on Stan Lee. But I think it's very important because it paints a very round picture of Stan. But there's, one of the things that gut punched me, and I just wanted to crawl through the pages and give the dude a hug, was when I think their second child died or something happened.
Yeah.
And I guess they were basically like, well, we have to adopt if we want more kids. And the adoption agency wouldn't adopt to them because they said, oh, you're a mixed couple. He's like, what are you talking about? We're not mixed. And it's like, oh, well, one of you's Jewish and the other is not, is Christian or Catholic, Protestant or whatever. And they wouldn't let them adopt a kid, and that's just a human moment,
Right.
But then you got,
that's one of those things like these, like sort of a public figure like Stan Lee, you sort of know them by way of their career and the highs and lows. And, it must have been a real bummer when you had to cancel Silver Surfer or something. But it's like, no, people are living a real life. Right. And those things that we sort of know because we're fans and fixate on because we're like fans of this stuff, that's like nothing compared to like the real stuff that's just part of anybody's life.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that he moved to California is because their apartment got broke into.
Right. Things were getting bad in New York. Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're going to I've been wanting to go to California anyway.
Kind of like the last straw.
Yeah. So, but then you have other moments where he's being like he sees a hot chick and he's following her, because he wants to meet her and, stuff like that. So, which I don't know. Like I say, it just presents a human picture of who Stan Lee is. So I do recommend I Am Stan. It's out now. It's published through, is it 10 Speed Press?
Yeah, 10 Speed Press, the same publisher as Jack Kirby, The Epic Life Making of Comics.
So you can find it bookstores, Amazon, your comic book store, might carry it. But check it out. I highly recommend it. Both from a historical, but also getting a better idea of who Stan was. I'll tell you going into this, because I've heard all these stories about Stan, like that, oh, he was the uncle on the front, but behind the scenes, he was not so great. And so I was actually kind of relieved when I went through it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. I was expecting to read worse stuff, even though, not every moment in here paints him in the perfect light. So was there any moment in here that surprised you when you were researching? You were like, wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, a ton of stuff. I mean, the more, personal thing, like the thing we were just talking about and stuff, but yeah, just the more personal stuff and basically like what he was up to from like through like the 40s to like the middle of the 50s. Cause that is kind of like a lost period just in comics history. Like we're sort of focused on golden age and then still Silver Age, and there's that period in between of like the 50s and stuff where it's like you have the the brief revival of Captain America
Right.
and stuff like just as a comics fan, I just wasn't as versed in of like, okay, what was Stan Lee doing during all these years? And so like reading about all his little side projects, his photo comics, all like, he was very restless, like very, had a lot of energy and was like,
He was constantly throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah.
He was never sitting around on his rear, and then of course towards the end, and I'll let people read, I feel sorry for him towards the end,
Sure.
It's so, and I'll just let people, that's the downside of fame or being a public figure, right? If you have the wrong people surrounding you, you can lose control of your life. So
yeah, I mean, it's also like it's easy to sort of devalue the people. Like when you're trying to reinvent yourself, don't like get rid of the people who like knew you before and like loved the pre the people who knew you before you made this sort of transformation, like, because those are like the people that keep you on
will
planet
protect
Earth.
you, right? Yeah, and will help protect you and stuff like that. So yeah, there's actually really good. I don't know if you listened to it. I think this may have come out after your book, but Todd McFarlane went on the Tim Ferriss show within the past few months and was talking about his time. I didn't know this. Todd McFarlane and Stan did a lot of touring together,
right? Yeah,
cons, and Todd's insight to Stan was touching. Like you got the sense that Todd and Stan were true friends. And he tells a lot of anecdotes about Stan and his energy and stuff. This was before Stan declined to the point where he was basically being trundled behind a table.
Yeah, I mean,
like a robot and then trundled off. Yeah.
I mean, he lived a really long time and like, and again, he was always sort of, young for his age and stuff, but that, eventually
time gets us all
down.
There's all right. But anyway, check it out. I Am Stan. Check out Tom's other stuff. You got Witchman Kickstarter. The Kickstarter will be done by the time this episode drops, but still be aware of Witchman. You could probably still find copies of Jack Kirby's Star Warriors out there at your comic shops. Or is that orderable? Or is there still stock?
Yeah, there's still stock on. Yeah, that's still.
Okay.
I haven't heard anything about it. Completely selling out on the publisher level. So yeah.
All right. You got American Barbarian. You got Satan's Soldier. Check out his Patreon. That'll be linked to the show notes. Or just go to patreon.com. Look for Tom Scioli, or Scioli, I should say. And I cannot recommend enough. I gushed over this and didn't stop gushing when you came on to talk about Transformers versus G.I. Joe. That is, if you haven't read that, people, that comic is not what you think it is. It transcends the light. It's its own thing. There's stuff creatively that Tom did in that book that it still messes with my head. Go check out Transformers versus G.I. Joe for a master class in what comics can be. It just blows me away, the stuff you did with the art form in that, Tom. So, and I know that's not your final masterpiece. You got something else in you coming.
I got plenty in me, but that was, I mean, it's almost 10 years ago. It's coming up on the 10-year anniversary, and people are still talking about it. It's still controversial. It's people are still discovering it too. Like people, it's shocked.
I kind of, and it's not a perfect analogy. I don't want to limit what you did, but there's Kubrick moments where you owned the art form and the medium in a way I've never seen anybody else do it. So and I love Transformers and I like G.I. Joe, but my love for it is way beyond that. It's just cool. So go check that out. Also on your GoBots, I just want to tell you that I loved when you had Psykill peel off of another character's face with his back tire. That was perfect. Thank you so much for doing that. That was really cool too. I know that didn't catch as much attention as your Transformers. Did you?
It
But
was,
your
I
GoBots
mean,
was cool.
just people don't expect as much from the GoBots, but it did really well. Like, and it was, I think it was even more of a surprise to people.
I knock around the Transformers fandom a lot, and there's a surprising deep love for GoBots, and by extension the Rock Lords,
Right.
because the Rock Lords were introduced in the GoBots movie or whatever. So so I mean there's some love, and then of course I don't know if you saw the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special.
I did.
But they had Psykill in that. That was so great.
I was excited about that.
Wasn't that great?
It's canonical,
Yeah. There's Psykill. Yeah, is in the MCU somehow. So, all right. If you need to go, we'll wrap here. Yeah. If you have time for a couple of questions, I have some unrelated questions.
Okay. Yeah. I have a little bit of time if you throw out a couple.
This is just having fun.
Yeah.
All right. This could be a podcast of its own, so I will work with you not to let this tangent to we're here talking for another 30 minutes about this. But do you feel like the New Gods and the Eternals work better separate from the other continuity and characters of the DC and Marvel universes? Like, I'm on the fence about the New Gods, but I feel like the Eternals should have been completely separate from mainline.
Yeah, I think Jack Kirby felt that way. I mean, and even like I've heard DC editorial talk about that with the New Gods, where it's like, I think it might have been Dan DiDio saying like that he, as like a fan and a reader of comics, totally thinks New Gods should be its own thing and not part of the DC universe. But as an executive or whatever at DC, it's like they have to be part of the DC universe.
Well, for DC, I think that like Darkseid feels very comfortable and normal to me as a villain in the DC universe, right? It's Darkseid,
right?
And we got Orion, but the actual fourth world mythology of New Genesis and Apocalypse and all of that stuff, that feels like its own thing. Now, it is melded with the DC universe, in my opinion, better than Eternals melds with the Marvel universe, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think they've made a lot of headway with the Eternals in recent years in terms of, but yeah, it is kind of like, okay, there's some redundancy with the New Gods are so different from everything else going on in the DC universe that they do mesh well because they're, coming in with a new note. But Eternals, there's some redundancy. There's Zorus, there's also Zeus. So it doesn't, because the Marvel Universe was co-created by Jack and the Eternals were created by Jack. DC Universe, not created by Jack. New Gods were.
Did you read the Mr. Miracle by Tom King? Did you read that?
I did, yeah.
I love that moment when there's like it's almost like the stormtroopers having a conversation in Star Wars. Like, you see the THX-38? There's these two sort of soldier type people on Apocalypse guarding something. And one of them's like, so what was the third world? And the other guy's like, what?
Right.
He's like, well, we're the fourth world. But I thought that was a fun little moment that he did. So, because he never explains what the fourth world is. He's like, I guess he's just like, it sounds cool, right? Or did he explain?
Well, that's the thing. The fourth world, I'm not a huge fan of like the fourth world moniker as like a way, like I understand why it makes sense because, I would call it the New Gods because that's what Kirby, he called it the New Gods. But then it's kind of like, okay, well, are you talking about the New Gods, the comic, or the New Gods as like so at least fourth world's a different word. But my impression is that fourth world was something that was created, maybe in like DC editorial that, and that they kind of, that they created it and then the fans grasped onto it and then that became the nomenclature. But I could be wrong, but I don't think that, like, I think it was a little bit of copy that they put on the cover.
Yeah, it's the fourth world.
Fourth world. And then Kirby eventually embraces it. But again,
it's got a great ring. It's got a great ring to it.
It does have a great ring to it. It's just kind of like, the first world is kind of like, the top, and then the second world is that, and then the third world is that. So then the fourth world is like, is like even less developed than the third world. It's kind of like it should maybe be the zero world or something. But again, like, it's over. But just to me, it's like, I'm not, it just doesn't like really do it for me. But it's, it is the nomenclature. It is what they call it. So
I mean, I love they talk about Kirby doing mythology. I mean, he's doing mythology there. I mean, he's got, the Apocalypse versus New Genesis and trading suns. And I mean, there's some really powerful stuff going on.
Yeah, I think it's some of the greatest stuff that's ever come out of comics. It's just like the term fourth world feels a little too like the rest of DC and not so much like of Kirby, just the name.
Right. Just we're going to call it the fourth world. But yeah, I feel like that, like I said, the fourth world character, the New Gods characters and the backstory has melded better in with the DC over time. The Eternals. Now I went back and just reread or really read for the first time all the way through the original Eternals issues, in the collected compendium. And by the way, when I talk about, comic books versus graphic novels, I mean, I do think that the compendiums are a wonderful boon to the comic book reader, right? But just, it would have been so much more fun to read them as they came out, right? So, and the Eternals, I was actually really blown away. I was like, I really like the Eternals more than I was expecting to read it.
It comes out of the gate so fast and so strong. And I feel like it is, Kirby kind of learning from his experience in comics. And it's like the New Gods was like a slow roll. Like, I mean, people talk about it being like rapid fire, but comparatively sort of a slow roll. And then it got canceled after 11 issues. So it's like, okay, this comic might get canceled. So let me get everything on the table as quickly as I can.
I love it. And I like the stuff that Karen, is it Gillen? Karen Gillen, has been doing with, the artist is phenomenal too. I can't think of the artist.
Is it Assad Ribic?
Yeah, that's it.
He's great.
Phenomenal stuff. So I've really, come to appreciate the Eternals more over the years. I need to go back and reread. I think didn't Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, Neil Gaiman's one is good too with John Romita Jr.
Yeah, I need to go back and revisit that. I think I've only read like one issue of it. But what the stuff that they're doing with the Eternals now is amazing. Why I think they don't mesh with the Marvel Universe continuity, like, Marvel 616 or whatever, is that because the Eternals' origins are so tied into the origin of the planet Earth. And so, like, you can't get away from, like, even now, like, oh, the Earth it's just a giant computer. And that's kind of where, they're taking it now that supports the Eternals stuff. And, like, it seems to, like when I was reading Marvel Comics growing up, I was like, oh, it's Earth, it's our Earth, but the only difference is they're superheroes.
Right. Yeah.
But now it's like with the Eternal stuff added into it, it's like a whole different thing. It's like, this whole different cosmology.
Right. Yeah.
And this and that. So I think Kirby, because there's one of the issues where the Incredible Hulk shows up, but he does all these gymnastics to have the Hulk be an animated robot. Because if I remember right, like editorial was like, we want the Hulk or we want, mainstream characters in there. So he did these gymnastics to have it both ways. So I don't think he wanted them.
No. And if you think of it, like at the time, a graphic novel wasn't an option. So back then, maybe the best thing would have been Kirby coming in with like a graphic novel called The New Gods, or coming into Marvel with a graphic novel called The Eternals that is just its own thing. But that wasn't the publishing model by that point. Ironically, a publishing model that Kirby helped revolutionize. Like, you probably, like, The New Gods probably could have been their own standalone thing if it was made at a time when DC was not interested in making all of their books part of the same universe, but after Marvel, they kind of had to, even though it was like two Earths and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I still don't buy the I'm talking about DC. I still don't buy their reasoning for Crisis. I love Crisis on Infinite Earths,
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah.
but I still don't buy their reasoning. It wasn't. No, there was no comic reader that thought that stuff was too complicated. It made it more interesting and fun for me. But anyway, I don't buy it. Maybe but I wasn't the one getting feedback in the editorial offices.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, like the what was it? It was Len Wein and George Perez. I don't think,
You mean Marv Wolfman?
or Marv. Yeah, I get those guys mixed up all the time. Yeah, Marv Wolfman and George Perez. I don't think they went into it with the idea of like, oh, we're going to destroy the DC universe. I think they entered, like, when they were first developing this idea, it was just going to be another one of those crises that they've been having since the 60s, and then
right, yeah, because they were doing the yearly crossovers. They were doing the yearly Earth 1, Earth 2 crossover. They've got the collections of those out there. It was like an annual tradition. Yeah, I mean, as much as I love Crisis on Infinite Earths and Secret Wars, I almost wish neither of them ever had happened, because it led to this yearly event thing that, they just had to keep topping it, and it got more and more ridiculous. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. All right. Let me see if I have any other. I think that was my main question. I wanted to get your perspective on that. Okay. So this is just something I just want you to know. We talked about this on Twitter years ago. I'm just going to bring it back up again.
Okay.
My dream project for Tom Scioli.
Okay, let me hear it.
Is a Land of the Lost series. Let me tell you why. All right. If you look at the world building of Land of the Lost, it's unlimited in potential for what you can do with it. It's not just dinosaurs and ape men running around. Okay. They have these pylons that are gateways to other realities. And those realities can be anything you want. So you could bring anything into or out of the valley that they're in. But to me, the dinosaurs are cool, and the slee stack are cool, and all that. But there are a lot of the stories, a lot of the episodes of Land of the Lost were really good sci-fi, being written by really good writers, and they utilize those pylons to bring in stuff from other universes and other realities. There was a very sci-fi. So, I mean, you could go cosmic, you could do whatever. So I know it's probably never going to happen. And I can even tell by the look on your face when I said Land of the Lost, you're like, but man, I just think it has so much potential. And I'm not even talking about the rights or the licensing.
Okay,
my personal dream project.
I think that would be a huge hurdle. But yeah, Land of the Lost is my favorite TV show.
Like, is it really?
Hands down, yeah. And
dude, I'm a huge Land of the Lost. Okay, yeah.
It is, like, I mean, the first thing that hits anybody as they watch it is like the cheesiness and stuff.
Right.
And there is an appeal there for sure. But it is like, some of the best sci-fi writing that was ever on TV, and certainly of it during its time.
Of its day, yeah.
The imagination was huge, and they just do so much with a limited budget. I mean, I'm sure it was very expensive as far as Saturday morning shows go, but it was still like a shoestring, and it's like they created this amazing world. And I'd love to do a Land of the Lost.
Let's say that licensing and rights issues were not a problem. Would you take a run at it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, that would be kind of like a dream project. And I love that stuff. It is. I mean, it's so much like just what I'm about. It's like just exactly the kind of stuff I'm into. And,
Well, I grew up loving Land of the Lost.
Yeah, me too.
The slee stack used to scare me.
I was scared of the slee stack.
I called them prayers because before I knew it, I watched it very young. They would walk around with their hands kind of
right. Yeah, their hands. Yeah, they'd be in a.
And I called them the prayers for some reason, like they were praying. But,
and the time travel stuff in there was so great, and then and the revelation that Enoch thought that he went back into the past to visit the early ancestors of his civilization, but only to realize that that they're actually he's actually their ancestor,
right?
And that this is the future of his, just a
There's
million
some
great
good,
little
yeah,
things like
for a
that.
kids TV show, Kids Saturday Morning. There was some, like they had that great set with Enoch where you had the sleeve stack skulls,
The skulls,
like the wisdom of the ancestors, and the like. I still just like want to play with when you go into the pylon.
Yeah, and there's the
a
little lights.
multicolored keyboard you can play with.
The episode that I like a lot that you don't really think of as much is there was like an ongoing thing of this alien who like lands in the land of the lost, and he's kind of like electromagnetic, and so he's made up of all these like pinpoints of light.
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember, yeah.
And then he has this like weird like mechanical chicken robot that kind of like patrols and
hops
stuff.
around, yeah.
No,
I just, I've always loved Land of the Lost. But the past few years, I jumped on a Land of the Lost Facebook group, and it's really reminded me of how cool the world building was, and how good the writing was, and just the cool stuff going on. Because most people just think of like Grumpy and Alice,
right?
and
The cheesy,
right.
It has all that stuff in there too, which is like it's a complete world. And I when the show Lost started, I thought, oh, they're doing like a serious grown-up Land of the Lost.
That would have been cool.
Took like the Land of part out,
That would have been cool.
Yeah, I mean, as the show developed, it became clear that it wasn't really that. But I thought that's what they were going for.
I didn't stick around to I heard it went off the rails, but the first like 3 or 4 seasons of Lost were amazing. There was some really good writing going on there. But I guess J.J. Abrams doesn't know what his resolution is going to be before he gets into a story. So he was just kind of every season just kind of making it more interesting or something. And I guess finally lost the thread. That's what I understand. That's his method. Like when he did the Star Wars, there was no plan for the 3 sequels, what was going to happen the first, second, third. They were just each movie was its own thing.
Yeah, like comics.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Yeah. You used a great line talking about comics, the monthly nature of comics, where it's a run-on sentence where you don't know where it's going to end. I've never thought of it that way. That's a great way to put it. So, all right, I'm going to wrap us up. You've been super gracious with your time, man, but at least you got to talk about Land of the Lost. Right?
That was a nice little surprise.
That's my dream project for you is that
Sid
or to go
Marty,
back to superpowers.
If you're listening to this, let's talk.
Well, they're reviving, like the Croft stuff is starting to get some attention on it. Like I don't know, you hear little noises, so I don't know. All right, folks, again, check out I Am Stan from Tom Scioli. It's a biographical graphic novel of the life of Stan Lee. Highly recommended. All right, I always do the bad joke of the week, even though this is no longer a weekly show. So this is probably going to come out kind of around Thanksgiving. So I picked out some bad jokes that are kind of about Thanksgiving. All right. How does a turkey travel?
How?
By gravy train. You're supposed to go, ooh.
Oh,
all right.
Oh,
it's terrible. All right. It's so terrible. What did the turkey say to the hunter on Thanksgiving Day?
What?
Quack, quack.
Oh.
That's great. All right, finally, what do you call, this is tangentially associated with Thanksgiving, what do you call a reluctant potato?
What?
A hesitator.
See, I'm doing it wrong because I like this kind of bad joke genre.
All right. Well, with that, Tom, as always, a pleasure. You are definitely one of my favorite creators working in comics, and you're a nice guy. I always enjoy interacting with you online or talking like this or whatever. You were definitely cool to interact with. You're very open with your process, and I love that. So anyway, so Tom, take care. All success and luck and all that with your past and future projects. Hope they keep selling and the new stuff you do sells. And everybody else, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays Geek Talk. Thanks so much for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shaneplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shane Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/ShanePlays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.